Chapter 29.
Battle of the Gardens. "All right, arms up,"
Drive Katawaki ordered. Obediently, Squall stretched his arms over his head without a twinge of pain from ribs that had been completely shattered yesterday.
"Down again,"
she smiled at him, pleased. He did so. The subtle interplay of muscles under his skin was as smooth and flawless as always. He had finally stopped coughing just an hour ago, though his breathing had returned to normal sometime in the night. The blood had finally stopped coming up around 5 in the morning.
"Punctured lungs,"
Drive Katawaki shook her head, clicking her tongue at him.
"Honestly, boy. Can I not leave you alone for 5 minutes without you hurting yourself?"
Squall raised an eyebrow at her, almost grinning back. She had not been happy yesterday afternoon to have a panting and sweating Zell and Irvine deposit the injured Squall at her feet. With his Cura spell, he had what he needed to heal, albeit slowly. Since Drive Katawaki had run out of Curaga spells, he had been forced to recover on Cura alone. He just needed someone to keep him from dying and watch him through the night so he didn't start drowning on his own blood at some point.
"Feeling all right?"
she asked when he continued to move without pain.
"Perfect,"
he nodded.
"Thank you for your care, Doctor." "Are you two done yet?"
Rinoa asked impatiently from just outside of his room. Squall was in the second patient room, the one with the door. Mostly so that the people of Garden wouldn't constantly be bothering him while he rested. It was closed at the moment because Drive Katawaki had wanted to perform the exam alone.
"You can come in, Rinoa,"
the good doctor called out, a small grin on her face. Drive Katawaki barely got to finish the sentence before Rinoa was pressing the button to slide it back open. She walked in quickly, frowning at the sight of Squall up and out of bed.
"Should you be moving around so soon?"
she asked, worried. Squall gave her a look as he reached for the shirt he had thrown onto the bed so Drive Katawaki could get a good look at his injuries. She had wanted to ensure the bruises and swelling were all down and that he could move without flinching. Rinoa had seen what the Cura spells could do. She knew, intellectually, that they had fixed Squall before after torture had broken his bones. However, he hadn't shown the damage as badly then as he had this time. He just wouldn't stop coughing up blood. She had been waiting near the gates for him to return. She had been playing cards with the gatekeeper, cursing as he stole cards and refused to give her the chance to win them back, when Zell had signaled from below that they had returned and to lower the lift. Rinoa had been expecting to see Squall again all day. She had been anticipating it. She had even dressed up in preparation for the dinner he had promised her. Then he had risen up from below. Irvine and Zell had both been supporting his weight. There was blood on his shirt and face. He had been struggling to breathe, his eyes glazed with pain and hypoxia. His boots had been dragging, but he had still been trying to walk. It felt like Zell had been yelling at her from the end of a long tunnel when he had ordered her to go put Drive Katawaki on standby. It was a good thing that Drive Katawaki was much more calm and capable than Rinoa in emergency medical situations. While Rinoa had been holding Squall's hand, wiping away the blood from his face with a warm washcloth, the good doctor had been seeing to him with her magical and non-magical medical knowledge. The only reason Rinoa had left during the night was because Drive Katawaki had kicked her out. Not because Rinoa was a bad visitor, but because Squall was a bad patient. Instead of trying to rest as he was supposed to, he kept trying to talk to her and reach for her. Bright and early this morning though, Rinoa was back at her station. Nita hadn't even gone off duty yet with the rising sun, and she was already up and in Squall's room. She let out a breath of relief when Squall slipped his shirt over his head without issue. He settled the clean white cloth Rinoa had brought him over his frame as drive. Katawaki walked back out of the room to her desk. She had some paperwork to finish about his injuries.
Are you okay?
Rinoa asked again, still worried.
I'm fine,
he promised, reaching for his gloves and the ring sitting on them.
It was a rookie mistake. I didn't get out of the way fast enough and I paid the price. How can you be so cavalier about it?
She frowned.
You almost died. That's not paying the price. That's exactly what it is. Most seeds aren't so lucky as to live to learn the lesson again.
Rinoa sighed and sat down on his bed. Her legs felt so shaky. So weak. Her heart had been racing since she had seen him, and not in the good way. Looking at him now, healthy and moving normally, almost made her want to cry. Squall paused as he reached for his jacket when he saw the look on her face.
What?
She shook her head.
I'm just glad you're okay. I got really scared there for a minute.
Squall said nothing as he picked up his jacket. She watched as he slipped it back over his shoulders, straightening out the collar. Somehow, it felt nice to know she worried over him. That she cared.
Hey, Rinoa.
Squall. His name was accompanied by Sue knocking on the frame of his open door. She looked inside, frowning.
Sorry, it's important. That's okay. What's up? It's Headmaster Sid. Is he okay?
Rinoa asked immediately, standing up. Sue shrugged.
I don't know. That's the problem. We can't find him. He's gone.
Squall frowned.
Gone? Where have you searched? Everywhere. I've had some seeds turning the garden upside down looking for him. And I know he didn't leave the garden. He wouldn't. He couldn't. Nita has been piloting all night. We're only just stopping. Did you talk to the gatekeeper?
Rinoa asked as Squall started forward. She followed him out of the room and the two of them fell in line with Sue.
I did. He said that he hasn't seen him at all. But he did say that yesterday, when he showed up in the morning to man the gate, someone had lowered the platform in the middle of the night. Why didn't he report it?
Squall demanded to know.
He said that he hadn't really thought anything of it. He doesn't leave his post until Nita starts up the garden and returns before he stops. The garden moves too fast for anyone to get off while it's going anyway. There's just no way he could left. All right, well let's search for him anyway. The faculty are still on the garden and one of them might have decided to get revenge for Norg.
Squall said.
I'll go start a formal search. You tell the gatekeeper that no one leaves until we find out where he went. Rinoa, go find Quistis. I need her help. Yes, sir,
Sue said, saluting him before splitting away at the nexus.
You got it,
Rinoa grinned before running off to complete her task. Squall started up towards the elevator. He was already going over a list of steps he needed to take. He really hoped that their elderly headmaster had just wandered off somewhere by himself for a little privacy. It was as Squall was walking onto the third floor, heading for the bridge anyway, when Nita's voice came over the intercom.
Squall, will you please report to the bridge? On the double. I repeat, Squall, report to the bridge on the double.
Squall frowned and broke into a jog. He covered the rest of the distance quickly and hit the switch for the rising platform as he was stepping on. Nita turned around in surprise.
Wow! That was fast even for on the double,
he said, grinning.
What's up?
Nita held out the binoculars he had been using, the grin fading quickly.
Take a look for yourself.
Frowning, Squall stepped forward and took the distance viewer from his hands. Honestly, he didn't even need them. He saw what Nita had spotted even as he was stepping up to the window. Far out across the barren landscape, currently moving over a forest, was Galbadia Garden. Squall cursed as he brought up the binoculars. With a few clicks of his fingers against the controls placed on the top, he focused in on the bridge of the school. Unlike VIII, their glass was all tinted and shadowed. Squall could only make out the silhouette of someone at a circular wheel and another beside him that lowered his hands away from his face. Lowered his binoculars. They were looking at them, too. Squall cursed as he removed his binoculars from his face. Galbadia Garden had gotten closer and Squall knew that it wasn't just because VIII was moving.
What do you think?
Nita asked, a dark expression on his face.
Damn!
Squall murmured to himself. What a time for the headmaster to disappear. There was no way they hasn't seen VIII Garden. The last time he had seen that garden, VIII and ARandomAudiobookAppeared had been using it as a military base. No doubt by now the sorceress and cipherer knew about their defeat. He honestly didn't think that they were going to be friendly. Besides, what was it that Headmaster Martine had said about using their garden as a base? If it was the sorceress's base and Seed was the sorceress's greatest enemy, then he had just as much reason to take on that garden as they did. His jaw clenched as he made the decision. Command the garden. Defeat the sorceress. Here was his chance.
The battle is inevitable,
Squall informed Nita, referring to his own decision.
The sorceress is with them, right?
Nita asked, his voice expressionless.
It's our job to defeat her, right? Then, this is it. I hope so,
Squall let out a breath, closing his eyes. He gathered himself quickly. He felt like he was mentally donning his Seed uniform. When his stormy gray eyes opened again, he was all business. Shrewd, calculating. A Seed in full glory. An army commander and a mercenary. This garden was his responsibility. The safety of everyone was in his hands right now. It was no different from managing a squad. It was just on a significantly larger scale. Come on. Think.
What do you want to do, Commander?
Nita asked in an official capacity.
The garden will proceed straight ahead,
Squall told him, reaching for the intercom.
Set our speed at 50% in case we need to take evasive maneuvers. Yes, sir.
Squall paused, hesitating for only a moment as he got his thoughts in order. He quickly ran down a list of strengths and weaknesses that he knew of about the populace here. They had seeds, yes, but not the full force of them. Most of the personnel aboard were students. Highly trained, certainly, but students nonetheless. He didn't want to throw a fully offensive line at an enemy in that case. Squall's thumb hit the small button on the microphone. He could hear the cheerful ringing of the bells catching everyone's attention. He hesitated for only a second. When he opened his mouth, Commander Leonhardt gave out orders to his forces.
This is Squall speaking. This is an emergency, so listen carefully. We are going into battle against Galbadia Garden immediately. This is not a drill. This message is for all combat-ready seats and students. First and second class sabers, assemble at the parking lot. Those with milligrams rank 3 or above, head to the second floor deck and await instructions. Be sure to have all magic, weapons, and available GFs equipped. The enemy will probably attempt to come aboard in our most obvious, vulnerable areas. Therefore, we must concentrate our forces at the front gate and the quad. If your student ID number is even, report to the quad. If it's odd, report to the front gate.
Those who have student ID numbers ending with an 8, take care of the junior classmen. Medic class students, report to Drive Katawaki for instruction. Instructors, follow emergency attack guidelines for your assignments.
Quistis, Zell, Selfie, report to the bridge right away.
Squall lifted his finger from the button and the cheerful ringing was awkward in the tense air.
Hey, hey, hey.
Squall jumped, turning in surprise at Irvine's call from below.
What up? I'm not invited.
Squall frowned and released the microphone back to the ceiling. He stepped onto the platform and hit the switch. As he was coming down, he was surprised to see Quistis, Selfie, and Irvine had gathered before he even called them.
I thought I was part of the gang,
Irvine pretended to be hurt.
And after all the effort I put into saving your sorry butt. Sorry about that,
Squall shrugged. He didn't want to explain right now that he had only made an effort to call the seeds. He didn't have the time.
What do you want us to do?
Quistis asked in full instructor mode.
I want you guys to help me lead the others,
Squall said. Which was the reason he had called on the seeds only. He didn't want to presume the other members of Garden would follow non-seed members in this situation.
When Zell gets here, we'll divide into 2 teams. Zell.
Selfie started, looking awkwardly over to Quistis.
I think he's taking a nap. Yeah. He said he hasn't slept at all lately. What?
Quistis frowned at her. Selfie nudged her with her elbow pointedly, clearly hoping that Squall wouldn't see. Which he did.
Oh, yeah.
Quistis said quickly, putting a smile on her face.
Right, a nap. What are you guys talking about?
Squall frowned at them. That lie had sounded hollow even before Selfie had nudged Quistis so obviously.
Nothing,
Quistis grinned at him knowingly.
It's our little secret.
Seriously? What was he doing? They didn't have time for this right now. They had even less time for Squall to bemoan something that was already done. He would chew out Zell later. For now, he had to just deal with the immediate problems.
Fine. I'm going to check the quad. Quistis, Selfie, you're with me. Irvine, find Zell. You guys work together and lead the team at the front gate. Alrighty.
Irvine winked, grinning.
We're still a distance away,
Squall told them, looking back to the wide window.
So don't bother getting your weapons out just yet. We'll worry about it later. Let's go.
Squall started running towards the open double doors. His mind was already thinking 3 steps ahead of himself. What to do next? Where to go? How to prepare? Calculations, plans, and strategies were racing through his mind as he pressed the call button for the elevator.
Hey!
Irvine ran to the double doors.
What about Rinoa?
Squall hesitated as the elevator opened. Quistis and Selfie ran inside ahead of him as he paused behind them. Rinoa. He had to take care of her. He had to make sure she was safe. This wasn't her battle, but she was smack dab in the middle of it. He rather wished she would hide with the non-combatants, but he knew better than to really expect it to happen. At the same time, he didn't have the luxury right now of putting everything on hold to find her and bring her back to his side. No matter how much he might want to. Squall took a deep breath and pulled the mantle of commander tighter around his shoulders. He turned back to Irvine and ordered him firmly.
You guys take care of her.
Irvine nodded as Squall stepped after the girls. Selfie had already hit the button for the first floor and the elevator started shutting almost as soon as Squall passed the threshold. Irvine watched them go down, trying to think of where Zell and Rinoa could be. The garden nexus was like a disturbed wasp hive. People were running all over the place. A few were milling about, confused and disoriented. Only students. The seeds were doing what they did best and getting everybody in line. Someone had already set up defensive lines along the walkways, creating a sort of tunnel effect that would force enemies where they wanted them to go. Squall had to order a few stragglers along the way as he made his way to the quad. People who didn't know where they should be despite his crystal clear instructions. It would be annoying if he had the luxury to be annoyed. Squall led Quistis and Selfie down the steps of the quad. He was already scanning about, looking for weaknesses in the defenses when he heard Zell's familiar voice calling out.
You guys are over here. Back up the advance guards. Straighten up that line. Weapons out and magic equipped. This is a bad time to forget your junctioning, so if you need tips, ask the guy beside you. This isn't an exam, cheating is so allowed. Alright. Hey, you.
Squall put some more speed into his steps as he followed Zell down further to where the stage had once stood. It was just an empty, open space now. Plenty of room for an enemy to come down and enter from the large, open air off the balcony.
In formation.
Zell was yelling, grinning from ear to ear. The students that had gathered were quickly falling in line.
All right. Listen up, troops. This is the big one. We gotta win, no matter what. You never know, you might make seed if you have a good performance. And if you turned in your written exam, that's a given. Who said this was an exam?
Squall asked as he slowed to a halt beside him. The students in line stiffened noticeably at his presence.
"S up, Squall,"
Zell saluted him lazily.
"I wasn't saying it was one, I was just saying you never know. It's called giving people incentive. You ever heard of it?" "I thought you were sleeping,"
Squall said dully, crossing his arms. He didn't believe it, he just wanted to hear what Zell had to say.
"Hey."
He blinked, confused. His eyes traveled over Squall's shoulders where the girls were deliberately making hand signs to shut up and not spill the beans.
"Oh, yeah."
Zell laughed, scratching his head.
"Your, announcement woke me up. Yeah. I'm not a saber class and my student ID is even, so I'm supposed to be here, right? Don't worry about a thing. I got this place covered. No big deal."
Squall stared at him. It wasn't like Squall hadn't planned on putting his people in charge. And Zell did seem eager for the job. Squall might not have a choice.
"Hey, yo, Squall,"
Zell grinned, peeking around. He jerked his head to the side.
"Come here for a sec, would you? I got something I wanna ask you."
Squall frowned but followed Zell a short distance from the students and Quistis and Selfie. Zell peeked around again before grinning at Squall in a way that made him a bit nervous.
It's about your ring,
he said, a very sweet smile on his face.
I know this might not be the time, but,
What was it? Squall raised an eyebrow at him, encouraging him to hurry up and spit it out. If Zell was going to remain here with Irvine, then Squall needed to get to the front gate. Zell took a fortifying breath.
Give me your ring, will ya?
Squall stared at him. Zell laughed uncomfortably.
I just wanna borrow it for a while. I won't lose it or anything, promise. Come on, what do you say? It's really important.
Squall's eyes moved down to his hand where his lion ring was resting over his glove. He had no real sentimental attachment to the piece of metal, but still.
Why do you need it?
He asked pointedly. It seemed like a fair question.
Zell
made a face like he had been hoping Squall wouldn't ask.
I can't really tell you that. I promised I would keep it secret. Come on, just give it to me. You can trust me. I'm gonna give it back, it's not like I wanna keep it.
What the hell? Squall frowned. He liked that ring. It was a set with his necklace and the pendant hanging from the hilt of his gunblade. Well, he guessed it was fine if Zell just wanted to borrow it. It was just a ring after all. He could get another one if he needed to. Zell's face broke out into a smile as Squall lifted his hands. He took hold of the ring and pulled. It slid a bit reluctantly from his finger, like the ring knew it was being given away. Squall frowned and moved his hand. It was a bit weird without the ring. Letting out a breath, he turned and held it out. Zell took hold of it eagerly. The silver band fell into his palm and Zell gave out a victory cry.
Woo! Yeah! Thanks man! I didn't think you were gonna give it to me. Rinoa is gonna be so happy.
Rinoa? Squall asked pointedly. And what did she want with his ring?
All right, Squall.
Zell grinned, stowing the ring in his pocket.
Just leave this place up to me.
Before Squall could say anything else, he was already turning and running back to the lines. Quistis had been directing them into formation in Zell's absence, the instructor in her coming out, as Selfie watching, swaying her weight between her feet. Squall returned to them slowly, trying to mentally figure out how best to distribute the few remaining troops at the front gate and why Rinoa would want his ring. Both things were of importance to him at this moment.
We're heading for the front gate,
Squall told the girls.
Zell, Irvine should be coming around soon looking for you. You two are to defend this area. Roger.
Zell pounded his chest.
I totally got this. Here he comes,
Quistis said, catching their attention. She was pointed to the stairs down to the quad where Irvine was taking the steps two at a time. Behind him, her rising sun on her arm, Rinoa was keeping up with him. There was a determined look in her eyes that Squall didn't like.
Zell.
Irvine sighed in relief at finding him.
So where were you? Obeying orders. Where you been?
Zell grinned.
Technically, wasn't your order to report to the bridge?
Selfie asked, grinning. Zell flinched as Irvine chuckled. He walked past Squall to join up with him. Rinoa's expression was unreadable as she stepped in front of Squall. The look he gave her was just as even. Nothing really passed between them for a long moment. They couldn't do anything else but this considering the situation.
I'm gonna fight, too,
Rinoa finally said, confirming his fear.
I don't wanna just hide. I know I can fight. Squall, you know I can fight. I've been training.
She had been with him and with a blaster instructor. She wasn't seed level, but she was at least trainee level. There were cadets here who couldn't brag much more than that. Still, he rather wished she wouldn't. He wanted her to let him deal with this while she remained safe with the other non-combatants. He couldn't say this wasn't her business though. Not considering she was living here just like any other. And he wasn't exactly in a position where he could say no to an experienced fighter.
I want to fight alongside everyone,
Rinoa repeated, her jaw set.
Please, Squall. Commander. Let me help you. Let me prove myself.
Squall bit back the completely pointless protests. He couldn't deny her this. He didn't have the right to say she couldn't fight. No matter how much he wanted to grab her. Hold her. Tell her that she didn't need to do this. She had nothing to prove to him. But she had everything to prove to herself.
I hope this is the last time we have to fight in our home,
Zell was saying, uncomfortable with the situation, but determined to see it through. Squall didn't turn to look at him.
Please?
Rinoa repeated, staring into his eyes. He could tell her no. She would obey him. This moment was too important for her to act out against the commanding officer. No matter that she hated him, she was still a general's daughter. She knew the absolute power a commander had to have over a battlefield. She wouldn't disobey an order from him at a moment like this.
Take care of yourself,
Squall finally said. Rinoa's face lifted as her shoulders set.
Thank you, Commander. Don't call me that.
She grinned.
Victory dinner for two later.
Squall lifted one corner of his mouth in a wry grin.
It's a date.
Rinoa's face broke out into a wide smile as the intercom chimed above their heads.
Squall.
Nita called urgently through the speaker.
Get back to the bridge right away.
Squall turned back to the others.
Zell, I'm counting on you. Irvine, Rinoa, back up your squad leader. Everyone, good luck. Yes, Commander.
The line of students called out in unison as Squall sprinted back towards the steps, Quistis and Selphie a step behind him.
He made me squad leader,
Zell cried in near ecstasy.
Congrats,
Irvine said dully as Rinoa chuckled.
All right.
Zell turned towards the open balcony.
Time to get it on.
Squall sent Quistis to check on the forces at the parking lot and Selphie to barricade the second-floor balcony. He went on up to the bridge alone. They were to meet back up with him here when they were done. He had to trust they could handle it without him. Back at the controls, Nita was already holding out the binoculars as Squall was riding up. He indicated with his head out the window.
Look.
Squall hurried over, taking the binoculars. He lifted them up to his face and focused in on the approaching garden. They were a lot closer than Squall was comfortable with. Was 50% really that fast, or was time just moving quicker now that they were in a bad situation? Balam Garden had started over the forest as well. Galbadia's ring was scheming the treetops as it rushed towards them. Squall may not be an expert on mobile gardens, but it appeared to him that they weren't bothering to go half speed. Birds burst from the trees that they passed over. Monsters and the rare animal scattered as it moved along. It took Squall a moment to notice what Nita had. Galbadia Garden had a loading dock on one of the upper stories. Squall could see that someone had made a great deal of modifications to it. Long tracks that pointed up at the ends. Resting on them were bikes with rockets. Green-clad Galbadian soldiers, a color he didn't recognize, were moving around the machines. Standing on a tall lookout over all of it, grinning into the wind, was Cypher. Squall thought he would have been prepared for this moment. He wasn't afraid to face Cypher, he never had been. It always seemed like just part of his life that Cypher was constantly there. A force in opposition to his own. Yet, despite how prepared he thought he was, Squall still felt a twinge of anxiety at seeing him. Not because he was afraid of Cypher, but because the last time Squall had seen him he had been strapped to electricity generator. The memory of the pain hadn't dulled with time. Shiva, for all she hid his childhood memories, hadn't made even a dent on that episode of his life. As if the agony had burned the images into his mind so deep that even a GF's presence couldn't dig them out. Squall's fingers tightened, the leather of his gloves complaining, as he beheld the smug smirk on Cypher's arrogant face. Not at all dissimilar to the last time.
Cypher is in charge over there,
Nita said carefully. None but his friends knew what transpired between him and Cypher in the prison. However, everyone knew of the animosity between the two men. Nita was checking out Squall carefully to gauge his reaction.
So he is,
Squall said, his voice neutral as he lowered the binoculars. All business. This wasn't a personal thing. It is a seed mission. He would react accordingly.
They're heading right for us,
Nita told him, looking forward.
Orders, Commander. Just keep going,
Squall said calmly. Cypher, Sir Cypher, grinned at the sight of Balam Garden rushing towards them. He had looked through the binoculars earlier, but he hadn't seen Squall at the helm. That didn't mean that his archenemy wasn't over there. He was probably gathered his evil seeds even now. How Cypher hoped that Squall was preparing for this battle. They were almost on top of each other. Cypher could make out the panels on the hull of the garden. The distance was just right. Cypher lifted his free hand and he heard the rocket cycles behind him rev their engines in response. The new air division of the G Army preparing for their first official launch. This was his doing. He reveled in the power of it. Because he had created this. This was his to command. He had ultimate control over life and death, and the thrill of it filled his veins like an intoxicating drug. Come on, Squall. Let's dance. Cypher threw out his arm. One of the technicians pressed the button, turning all the lights green. Every rocket cycle's engine roared. The men weren't exactly in perfect formation. Some shot forward immediately, a few slackers hesitated for a second. It didn't matter. They all took off. Cypher stood back, grinning at the smoke trails they left behind as the rocket thrusters burst into life at the apex of the jump. The cyclists roared forward. A few seconds after ignition, the rockets fell away. Some of the cycles landed against the hull of the garden. Others landed directly on the balcony of the quad. The biggest opening this side of the garden and easier to reach than the low-set front gates. The cries of battle were too far away to hear, but Cypher felt them nonetheless. He grinned at the indescribable feeling of power lighting up his mind.
We're gonna crash,
Nita yelled as the last gap between the gardens closed.
Go right.
Squall ordered. Nita grabbed the control pillar and threw it right. The garden lurched and the two buildings side-swiped each other. The groaning of metal vibrated through the entire structure. Squall threw out his leg, catching himself before he fell. He cursed when he saw the fading smoke trails of the rocket bikes. His eyes traced their trajectory as he reached for the intercom mic.
The enemy garden is right by us. Quad team. Watch out. ARGH.
Zell cried out as he snatched a passing rocket cyclist from his bike and threw him down to the ground. His bike, uncontrolled, destabilized and toppled over. It fell onto its side and its momentum carried it forward until it crashed into the wall.
How you holding up, Rinoa?
Irvine asked as he took down another cyclist with a shotgun blast.
I'm fine.
She yelled, shooting her rising sun. The bright red blade flew and cut through the metal wheels of one of the bikes. The soldier atop it cried out as it fell, out of his control, and he and the bike rushed by Rinoa so fast it upset her hair. She caught her edge easily as the man and bike crashed into a fireball behind her.
But the students' lines are destroyed. They're panicking. Well, they are mostly students,
Zell made a face.
Fira.
The large fireball was thrown from his hand like a ball. It raced along the balcony, superheating the dirt and melting the rubber tires of 3 different bikes. The men cried out as they began losing control of their machines. Irvine took down one with a gunshot. Rinoa took out 2 in a row with a single blast of her edge.
Come on,
Zell jerked his head forward.
Let's go forward and hit them before they land. At least give the students more of a fighting chance. Coming.
Rinoa caught her rising sun as she started forward. Irvine was already behind Zell, firing into the oncoming group of cyclists. How many of them were there?
Dead ahead.
Zell yelled, running towards the end of the balcony. His fists were flaming as he brought them back. 1 punch, 2 into the air sent raging fireballs blasting through the sky towards the oncoming squadron. 2 men, hit by the engulfing flames, fell from the sky. Irvine cocked his shotgun and let out 2 quick shots.
Oh, yeah.
Zell turned as Rinoa drew even with him. He reached into his pocket and closed his hands around Squall's silver ring.
Rinoa, here you go. I got it straight from Squall.
Rinoa held out her hand and blinked when Zell dropped the gleaming band into it. She was honestly surprised. She hadn't believed that Zell would actually be able to get it. She knew he said that he would, but Zell postured a lot.
Seriously?
She looked to him, a grin forming.
Yeah,
Zell smirked.
Like I said, I'll make you one just like it. Till then, hold on to it for me, will you? I need the original, but it feels kind of weird carrying it myself. What did you say to him?
Rinoa laughed, holding up the ring to her eyes. The monster engraving matched the one on his necklace, his pendant, and his sword. Everyone in Garden had come to associate the symbol with him. The open mouth with bared fangs was intimidating but beautiful. Not unlike the man himself. Zell shrugged off her question coolly.
I just told him to hand it over.
Rinoa bit her lip eagerly as she slipped it over the ring finger of her left hand. Her eyes lit up at the way the silver looked against her skin. Then she frowned at the way it sat awkwardly.
I like it, but it's too big. It's not like you're gonna wear that one,
Irvine told her, tossing back his hair as he quickly reloaded his gun.
Now, will you two stop gabbing and help me? Right.
Rinoa nodded and quickly lifted the chain from her neck. Zell ran forward with Irvine as she carefully slipped the ring onto her chain. It clicked gently against her mother's wedding band, the two silver rings matching each other. Rinoa smiled as she tied the clasp back around her neck. The new added weight was unfamiliar but not uncomfortable. She couldn't help but smile at the monster marking her. Squall's monster. It looked just right sitting there over the swell of the breasts he liked so much. Grinning, could things be any more perfect? She ran forward to continue the battle against Galbadia Garden and the Galbadian army. Irvine was standing back. He had better aim from a distance. He was picking off rocket cyclists like prizes at a garden festival. Rinoa joined Zell at his side closer to the edge of the long balcony. He was shooting fireballs.
All right, Diablos,
Rinoa grinned, thinking through her new magic.
Blind.
She swept out her hand. Spheres of darkness erupted from her hand. All three hit the faces of incoming soldiers, covering their eyes with sticky darkness. The men cried out, grabbing for their faces. Unable to see, they could no longer control their landing. 3 bikes crashed and 3 men downed with barely any effort on her part.
Nice.
Zell laughed. Balam rocked as Galbadia Garden rammed into its side. All 3 of them pitched forward. Rinoa caught herself on her hands, opening up abrasions on her palms. Irvine fell to his knee. Zell dropped back onto his butt. The loud crack of breaking rock with the groan of warping metal filled the air. Rinoa was pushing herself up as she felt the ground drop out from beneath her. Zell cried out, turning and running backwards. He had to jump over the large fissure that opened in the ground beneath their feet. He landed awkwardly, picking himself up at the last second. Rinoa screamed as she fell down with the shelf of rock. Pain burst in her hands as she scrambled against the newly exposed cliff face. A sharp ledge hit her palms and she grabbed on tight despite the pain of it. Her entire body weight jerked down against her arms and she clenched her teeth to avoid the desire to let go. Panting, she turned over her shoulder and looked down in time to see the shelf of rock she had fallen with hit the ring beneath the garden. The anti-directional spinning of the 3 rings hit the enormous rock at the same time and shattered it into dust. Rinoa's eyes widened as she looked up. She could just make out Zell's face as he leaned over the edge of the cliff.
Damn it!
Zell yelled, reaching out pointlessly. They knew without needing to actually measure that his arms weren't that long.
I can't reach her.
Irvine grabbed his arm and jerked him back before he could fall over.
Let's find something to pull her up.
Zell nodded and looked over the edge.
Rinoa, hold on. We'll be right back. Yeah, sure.
Rinoa mumbled as they disappeared. Diablos was already doing what he could. The master of gravity was loosening the grip of the planet on her body, giving her abused hands some relief. He couldn't take the entirety of her weight though, and Rinoa didn't see anything to grab onto that she could climb. She didn't regret giving Quistis her float spells until just this moment. Up above, Zell and Irvine were sprinting through the quad. Trees, shrubs, steps. There wasn't even a metal rail he could knock down to lower to her.
Come on!
Zell yelled, a horrible sinkhole forming in his gut. Squall was going to kill him. And he was going to deserve it.
Isn't there anything we can use?
They dodged through students defending the area. They took out a few soldiers, both on and off bikes, as they ran. They didn't stop though. They were both looking all over for anything they could use to get Rinoa back up. They ran straight out of the quad into the garden nexus. The glass rails here were totally useless. Benches, trash cans. More students fighting, though less so here. They were only fighting back against the soldiers that had broken through the defenses. The tunnel effect of lines along the paths was working though, keeping the fighting contained to one area. Zell was breathing hard, panicking now as he ran further down the garden. Rope. Chains. Something. There had to be some useful tool they could use.
Zell!
Irvine called out, pointing forward. Squall, Quistis, and Selfie were running down the steps from the elevator dais. Sue was leading them past the directory.
They're coming in from the front gate.
She was yelling, pointing ahead.
Squall, you have to do something.
Zell and Irvine fell in line behind them, keeping up as they made their way forward. Squall growled in annoyance. The lines here were holding, but barely. There was a courtyard in Galbadia Garden that was leaning over directly into the entrance here. Soldiers were jumping off their garden and onto theirs easily.
Blizzara!
Squall yelled, throwing out his magic. Like a cage, long spears of ice erupted from the ground and embedded themselves into the ceiling. The soldiers were left pounding against an ice wall. It wouldn't last forever. But Squall hoped it would last long enough for the students and seeds here to beat back this current crop of soldiers. Then they could be ready for the next.
Squall!
Zell's voice filled him with dread. There was only one reason he would be here and not at the quad doing as he was ordered. Squall turned quickly, ready for the news that they had lost control of the quad and the soldiers were pouring in from there.
Rinoa's in trouble!
Zell yelled immediately, panicked. Icy fear clenched Squall's gut. He couldn't help but notice her absence. Where was she?
We gotta hurry.
Irvine pointed back towards the quad.
She's gonna fall off the garden and we have no way of getting to her.
Damn!
Squall!
Nita yelled over the intercom.
The enemy is attacking the classrooms. The junior classmen are hiding up there. We have to do something fast. The enemy's breaking through.
Sue warned as the soldiers burned through his ice.
Squall, did you hear me?
Zell asked as though baffled as to why he wasn't moving.
Yeah. I heard you.
Squall gave him a cold look.
But she's not the only one in danger.
Irvine growled at him.
Didn't think you were so heartless, Squall. Rinoa is gonna die. Don't you realize that?
Heartless? What was he talking about? Of course Squall had to go save her. Everything in him was screaming at him to do just that. Abandon all his responsibility and rush to her aid. But these feelings were still new to him. Squall had been training for nearly a full decade to be a mercenary first and foremost. He couldn't abandon his responsibility. Rinoa was in danger, yes, but so were children and students. She wouldn't forgive him for abandoning them. He wouldn't forgive himself for it either. Think fast, Squall, he told himself. Quickest way to save as many people as possible.
Quistis, you stay here with Sue. You two defend the front gate. All right,
she nodded. The two of them jumped the turnstiles and ran forward to join the forces fighting the soldiers coming through his ice.
Irvine, Selfie, you're with me,
he said to them.
We'll go to the second floor classrooms and save the underclassmen. Right.
Selfie nodded along with Irvine.
Zell,
Squall turned to him. Zell's back straightened guiltily. Squall gave him a freezing cold look that somehow burned.
You help Renoa. Do whatever it takes, all right.
Zell nodded, pounding his chest.
Leave it to me.
It was the best Squall could do. Saving the underclassmen in an emergency situation took priority. He had to go up there. He was left with little choice but to trust Zell. As the blonde warrior was running off, Squall had to squash his feelings of regret. He couldn't save her himself, but he could command the force that did. So long as she was safe, that was what mattered more than anything.
Squall, the enemy is coming in from the sky.
Nita yelled as Squall led Selfie and Irvine back towards the elevator.
They're heading for classroom 2F.
Selfie hit the elevator first, slamming her hand on the button. Personal flying machines. Expensive, still a bit glitchy, and so large that it was impractical to stock very many of them. The 5 men piloting these could only think about getting off again. None of them felt safe until they were docked on Baumgarten's hull. Pierced by twin lances near the arms, the flight stands anchored themselves in place. With a push of the button, the green-clad G-soldiers began rappelling down on the black cord that released from the back of the machine. They moved down quickly, searching for the glass window somewhere along the metal hull. The silver of the tinting concealed the opening until they were almost on top of it. Boots thudded against the glass. The men turned to each other and nodded. In sync, they all jumped. Slam! Their boots crashed through the glass into one of the seed classrooms. Razor-sharp shards fell all around them as they hit the ground, their cables swinging out behind them. They came up quickly, pulling out their sabers as they took in the room they had landed in. Rows of computer terminals. A girl in siege uniform standing with a group of huddling children. They had all turned at the sound of the soldiers' boots on the glass and were staring at them with wide eyes. It sat heavy in the soldiers' bellies, being forced to kill children. But it was either kill these children or allow the sorceress would kill theirs. The door of the classroom slid open quickly.
Blizzara!
The first soldier, speared by so many spires of ice, fell down dead. Selfie cried out as she ran in, jumping up onto the backs of the terminals. She used them as steps to run forward, drawing back her nunchaku.
Sir!
One of the men turned to him as Irvine ran in after her, Squall just a step behind.
Dispose of the garden as planned.
The captain ordered. He brought up his saber and caught Selfie's attack against the metal body.
Dispose!
Irvine growled, angered as he moved to stand in front of the underclassmen.
No way!
Selfie growled. Face drawn in fury, she wasn't losing another garden. Selfie slammed her foot into the captain's face. He cried out in pain as his lip started bleeding. Looping the chain of her nunchaku around his neck, she flipped over his body. The chain tightened as she landed. She pulled him backwards, over her body, and down to the ground. The crack of his neck snapping was echoed by the blast of Irvine's shotgun. The third soldier fell, a large hole in his chest. Squall sliced up, taking out one, then pivoted and sliced down, taking out the second. The soldier's lighter armor, made for flight, not fight, fell easily.
That's what I'm talking about.
Selfie giggled, jerking her crescent wish free. Squall turned quickly to the seed caretaker for the underclassmen. She was standing, a look of relief on her face, as the younglings all looked up at him with impressed gazes.
"You all right?"
he asked, referring to them as a whole.
"We're all okay,"
she nodded to him.
"Thank you, Commander." "Take them somewhere safe,"
Squall ordered.
"The non-combatants are hiding out in the dorms. You should join them." "Yes, sir,"
she saluted him.
"Come on, kids. Hurry up."
Still giving Squall looks filled with hero worship, the underclassmen followed her out. Squall let out a long breath as he sheathed his sword. That was one problem dealt with. Maybe now he could.
"Squall!"
he very nearly groaned. Now what?
"Squall! Come up to the bridge. Drive Katawaki is here."
He frowned. The doctor? What did she want with him?
"Irvine, Selfie. You two check the second floor for any more enemies. Then go downstairs and help the others." "Got it."
Grinning, Selfie ran off after Irvine. Squall sprinted from the classroom, heading for the elevator. He was glad he had sent the other two to deal with any other surprises. He could see students laying around the halls, injured and exhausted from similar fights. He had little choice at the moment but to run past them. If he passed out a few cure spells along the way. Well, it wasn't like he used cure spells anymore anyway. The elevator moved quickly up the shaft and Squall rotated his shoulder. He was starting to think he was getting too old for this already. The doors slid open and he ran out. Quistis was already walking through the double doors as he did emerged. She looked back and the two of them stopped in front of Drive Katawaki, who was standing at the base of the platform to the bridge.
"Has the infirmary been taken?"
Squall asked immediately, fearing the answer.
"No,"
she shook her head, easing his panic a bit.
"I've got the medic students manning everything. They can handle it until I get back. What's the situation?"
Squall frowned, looking out the window. He could see the gardens had slipped past each other on the last hit. They were coming back around though. Nita wasn't giving any quarter as he charged down the enemy gardens. They would be on them soon.
"We were able to stop the first two waves of the attack,"
Squall said, almost reporting it to her.
"But our forces aren't looking good. Many are injured, a lot of them are tired. They're just students. We don't have enough seeds. If they send another wave, I don't know if we can hold them off."
The doctor hummed noncommittally. She turned to Quistis.
"And? How's your team?" "Not good."
Quistis shook her head. There was a long slice along her brow that had already stopped bleeding and a large bruise forming on her shoulder, just above her glove.
"The force at the front gate is still holding its ground, but barely. Squall is right, I don't think we can take another hit."
Drive Katawaki sighed.
"So? It looks like this is it." "Their garden has more experienced fighters,"
Quistis sighed, touching her bruised shoulder with gentle fingers.
"They have an actual army. On the other hand, most of our troops are students who are still in training. They have the will. But a lot of them don't even have GFs yet. Maybe we should just consider retreating. Gather our forces. Attack another day."
Squall crossed his arms, resisting the urge to growl in frustration. It killed him to retreat. It was just a tactical word for defeat. Besides, would the other garden even let them escape? Regrets began running through his mind. poisoning his thoughts. Maybe he should have focused on attacking in the beginning instead of concentrating on their defenses. Maybe he should have been more involved in the battle, allowed Sue to lead. Maybe he had been wrong in attacking their garden in the first place, no matter that it was mutual. If he had run before they even met, no one would be hurt right now. Squall. His eyes focused on Drive Katawaki, looking at him with a strange expression on her aged face.
Cypher is with them, right?
His hand closed into a fist. She nodded, accepting that as an answer.
You said it yourself. There's no way you can run from him.
A grin broke out on her face.
It's kind of your destiny to face him. I wish people would stop talking about my destiny.
Squall turned from her. First Headmaster Sid, now her. Was there nothing in his life that was his choice? Not that she was wrong. That was probably why it irked so bad to think of retreating. Because he was, in effect, running away from Cypher. It burned.
Well,
Drive Katawaki hit his arm.
Looks like it's now or never. You've come this far already. What is there to think about? Surely you're not going to start running away now.
Squall growled, his fist slamming to his side as anger and hatred filled his heart.
There's no way I'm gonna run from him.
Like hell. Retreat? Seed didn't retreat. You made Seed because you were willing to give your life for the cause. There wasn't a man, woman, or child in this garden who didn't share that feeling. From the commander himself down to the kids who trained daily to be in Seed.
Attacking them might be our only chance,
Squall said firmly.
We can't escape them, and it's not like the garden is capable of hiding. So we fight. To the last man standing. If we can't hold our lines here, then we take it to them. Do what we do best. The only problem is how we're going to board their garden.
Quistis thought for a moment, frowning.
Well, how about if we crash into it? Like they're doing. I know it sounds crazy, but at least we'll be able to get in. Their pilot has been ramming us. I'm sure Nita can do it, no problem.
Squall nodded.
We have no choice. Let's do it.
The doors burst open and Zell ran in, panting. Irvine and Selfie were hot on his heels. Squall frowned, his heart sinking. The hatred faded fast, replaced by dread.
Where's Rinoa?
He demanded to know, looking around quickly like she might jump out from behind the door. Zell looked like he had swallowed something bitter. Guilt laid heavy on his face as he turned away, unable to look at Squall.
Sorry, man. There's nothing I can do. There's no way to get to the quad. Those bastards have the area barricaded. Total shutdown. The only way we can get to her now is by climbing over the dam roof. Or flying.
Squall's jaw tightened as his eyes shut. Damn. 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 Rinoa.
Whoa.
Irvine yelled out, forcing Squall's eyes open. He was looking at him, face drawn in surprised dismay.
Wait a minute. You just gave up on her, didn't you?
Irvine leveled an accusing finger at Squall, stepping forward angrily. Squall opened his mouth, but no words came out. He didn't abandon her. He just didn't know what to do for her.
Listen. Do me a favor.
Irvine put his hands on Squall's shoulders, shaking him slightly as though trying to knock sense into him.
You go help Rinoa. It may be too late, but don't give up until you're certain that there's nothing more you can do. She's not gone yet, so there's still a chance to save her.
Responsibility weighed heavy on Squall's soul.
I have to lead the attack. I don't care what you have to do. Or how you feel. I may not be you levels of good, but I have those 3 and Sue backing me up. I think we can be fine without you. Just do it. Please. For Rinoa. For yourself.
Squall hesitated again. His heart warring with his head. He couldn't leave his position. He couldn't leave her.
Listen to Irvine, Squall,
Quistis said gently, smiling at him sweetly.
She's one of us. One of your friends. And she needs help. Nothing can be more important than that.
So many things were more important than his feelings.
Yeah.
Selfie stomped, glaring at him.
What are you waiting for? I can't believe you. Don't you ever do something that's beyond your duty, Squall.
He wasn't a machine. He could choose for himself. Right?
Come on, Squall.
Zell beseeched him.
Please. It's gotta be you. You can't just send someone else to do it. You're the one that has to save her. You're the only one who can now.
Why was everyone ganging up on him right now? It wasn't like he wanted to leave her behind.
Hey.
Irvine's call turned him from the others. He grinned at him, smirking with his hands on his hips, stepping back in front of the others.
I'll take everyone inside Galbadia Garden. Don't worry. I know the place like the back of my hand. There's no one more qualified to bust inside than me. Not even you, Commander. We'll clear a path,
Quistis nodded, thinking quickly.
Once Squall and Rinoa arrives, we'll move in. Find the sorceress. Take her out.
He stared between them. Unsure what to say. They were making their lives more difficult just so he could go save this one girl. There were so many in danger right now. His skills on the battlefield were unparalleled in this garden and they all knew it. But they were willing to pick up the slack so he could follow what his heart was screaming at him to do.
Squall.
Drive Katawaki's soft call turned him back to her.
You're forgetting something very important.
He blinked. What? She turned and deliberately walked back onto the platform. Squall followed her quickly and the two of them rode up together. On the bridge, Nita didn't turn to see them. He was so focused on avoiding the next charge from Galbadia Garden that he barely heard their ascent. The doctor reached up and took hold of the mic. She turned back and held it out to Squall with a caring smile on her face.
Talk to your men, Squall. Encourage them. As their leader, it's your duty.
Squall frowned, staring at the mic wearily like it was a poisonous snake poised to bite him. Talk to them? Encourage them? He didn't really do that. When the silence dragged on, Nita looked over his shoulder. He grinned as the gardens passed each other smoothly, his piloting preventing another collision.
You probably don't know this, Squall, but everybody in this garden looks up to you.
Squall frowned up at him. They did what? Why?
They like you,
Nita grinned.
They know you're bad at talking, but you're great at being a seed. You're good at taking care of people. You're good at being there for others. You always help anyone who asks and you never turn your back because something gets too hard. If you talk, I know people will listen.
Squall looked back at the mic as Nita turned the garden around. He could practically feel the presence of everyone below. Fighting. Healing. Hurting. Slowly, he reached out and took hold of the mic. He took a deep breath as Drive Katawaki stepped back, smiling at him. That was her boy. Squall clicked the button, turning on the intercom. Someone had disabled the cheerful jingle, so he heard only the soft buzzing of feedback telling him it was operational.
Everybody! This is Squall.
He hesitated, unsure of himself. He wished the headmaster was here, he always knew what to say. Or Rinoa. She was good at getting him to talk. If he closed her eyes, he could see her face. Encouraging him. Smiling, urging him forward. He could lose her right now.
How's everyone doing?
The question was soft, filled with his own emotions.
You're all probably too tired to even stand up after all the fighting. But I want everyone to listen to me.
Slowly, the injured students in the halls that Squall had given his cure spells to turned and lifted their heads up to the ceiling.
We still have a chance to win, and I need you help. This is going to be our final battle. We're going to attack them before they come in again. To do that, we're going to head straight into garden. So I want everyone to prepare for a major collision.
Irvine jumped the turnstiles as Quistis and Sue urged the remaining students into formation. Those who were too injured to stand were already being seen to by an overworked medical staff. No one was complaining.
Take care of the junior classmen. Irvine, Quistis, Zell, and Selfie will lead the attack into their garden. Sue will coordinate the attack from here. As for everyone else, please support them if you can.
Another student, healed enough now to get back up, got to his feet. His weapon was heavy in his hand, but he wasn't putting it down. No one would. They had trained too hard for too long to let something like this stop them. As long as they could fight, they would.
Seed was formed to fight the sorceress. At least. That's what I was told. And this garden was created to train seeds. So this battle is Garden's destiny. Our destiny.
Zell turned as the girl from the library stepped forward. There was a large gash on her arm, but she had never looked so determined. Her hair had fallen out, and she had never looked so pretty either. Zell felt his face flushing to look at her. She grinned at him, standing proud with the other students that were preparing to fight again.
It's a grueling battle, and I'm sure you guys are all exhausted. But I don't want to have any regrets. I don't want anyone to look back and regret this day. So, just this once, I want you guys to give everything you got. For yourselves. And for me.
Breathing hard, for some reason his heart racing in his chest, Squall lifted his finger from the button of the mic. He looked up, uncertain of himself. Drive Katawaki was smiling.
You did great. That was wonderful.
He let out a breath as she turned to Nita. Her serene face was fierce and grinning.
Okay. Nita. Let's bash into them. Really give it to them good. Yes, ma'am.
Tired of evasive maneuvers, eager to fight in his own way, Nita turned the control pillar quickly. The garden obeyed like it was an extension of his own body. The pilot of Galbadia Garden, unprepared for the sudden offensive, didn't move in time. Balam smashed into them, their magic rings colliding and sending up sparks of light. Nita growled, pushing harder against the resistance. Galbadia garden groaned as it was lowered forcibly by Balaam's weight. Its rings smashed into the dirt, grinding along the ground, digging out long trenches.
Here it comes!
Irvine yelled, standing near the edge of the front gate ledge. He was standing back, holding out his hands, waiting for the right moment. When the outer courtyard of their garden was lined up just right, Balaam pressed down further, its ring slicing against the hull of Galbadia garden, digging into its mechanics. The garden let out a long groan as its ring was pushed further down into the earth. The ring around Galbadia garden snapped and shards of magic shattered. The garden crashed to the ground, Balaam pushing down against it still. The front gate ledge was near even with the courtyard of Galbadia.
Move out!
Irvine yelled, running forward. Like an avalanche, seeds and students poured out of the garden. They leapt between the space, landing on the dirt and charging forward towards the army that hadn't been prepared for them. Irvine and the others led the lines, the excitement of the battle singing in their veins.
Oh yeah!
Zell yelled, his fists burning, his eyes smoking.
We're in, baby! You ready, guys?
Quistis grinning, wind and electricity whipping about her hair.
You betcha!
Selfie grinned. Ruby light was shining from her eyes, her voice melodic, the water condensing around her body and falling into a puddle at her feet. Irvine grinned, cocking his gun as the earth rumbled with each step he took. He let out the first shot. It ran out, loud and proud, over the entire area. For me and Selfie. For the world. For Balaam and Trabia. It's payback time. The Seed and G armies clashed. Despite Squall clicking the button for the first floor, the elevator stopped on the second. Squall found out why when, as the doors were opening, a frantic girl was already rushing in. She slammed against his chest and her white eyes recognized him. She grabbed his jacket, her voice eager and desperate.
Commander! Please, help me! Mark is gone! What?
Squall frowned, confused at the sudden attack.
Mark. He's got blonde hair, green eyes, he's like this big. He wears his uniform all the time. Please help me find him.
She held out her hand down below her waist to emphasize Mark's height. Damn it. An underclassman. They took priority. He couldn't leave a kid alone. There were still flying soldiers around.
All right.
Squall stepped out with her, pushing her hands off of him.
You wait here. I'll go find him.
Her sobs of gratitude followed him down the hall. His boots echoed loudly in the empty, abandoned hallway as he sprinted down the circle. The doors on the classrooms had been left open, emergency procedures flipped the locks and trapped them that way. It made it easy for Squall to peek his head in each one as he ran, looking for a small boy. It was the small hiccups of crying that caught his attention. Not in a room, but in the halls. In the back, towards the emergency exit and the entrance to the second-floor balcony, a young underclassman wearing his student uniform was curled up in the middle of the floor. He was crying, holding his legs to his chest and rocking back and forth. He didn't look up until Squall slid to a stop in front of him. Squall reached out, pulling him into a sitting position and quickly checking for injuries. He saw none. Only fear in the child's eyes. Relief flooded his veins as he nodded at the boy. In full commander's voice, he spoke softly but firmly.
You all right, kid?
The little boy sniffed pathetically.
Yeah. Okay. Stand up.
Squall grabbed him by his thin arms and set him up onto his feet. The boy sniffed again, looking at him with sorrow.
I'm sorry. Why?
Squall asked, leaning back.
You said to give everything you got. But I couldn't do anything.
More tears, big and wet, leaked from his eyes. He rubbed his running nose on his sleeve. Squall opened his mouth but no words came out. This wasn't exactly what he meant. He hadn't considered this as a potential consequence of his words. His immediate reaction, to tell the kid to forget about it, was quickly cut off. He could only imagine how he would feel if someone told him to forget about it when they had just told him to try his best and he had been trying. It would have felt like failure. He couldn't bring that feeling on a kid who had honestly been giving his all.
Hey!
Squall reached out and took his shoulders, looking at him directly.
Sitting here isn't giving everything you've got. You want to give everything you got. Yeah.
The boy's eyes dried slightly as he looked up, eager to hear his instructions.
Then I need you to go back towards the elevator. There's a girl waiting for you down the hall. She's going to take you to the other underclassmen. What I need from you, and the others underclassmen, is to train. To learn. To help out in any small way you can. What?
The boy frowned, confused.
That's not helping. Yes, it is. It's helping a great deal. Without you and the others, there won't be any new seeds. The best thing you can do now is learn. So, one day, you can fight without crying. Right.
The boy sniffed, trying to straighten his shoulders. He nodded once.
Yes, Commander. Good. Go. On the double, Cadet.
The boy flashed him a tiny, messy salute. Then he turned and started running. Squall grinned after him, getting to his feet slowly. Okay, that wasn't so bad. The shifted of the large metal door to the second-floor balcony was his only warning. Pain exploded in the back of Squall's head as he was rammed into from behind by something large and metal. His teeth cut against his lips as he fell to the ground. The loud thrumming of the green flying machine went directly over his head, then back against as the G-soldier tried to run him over. Squall pushed himself up, spiting out the coppery taste of his own blood. Before he could even straighten fully. Wham! The air was forced from him in a rush as the machine crashed into his chest. Squall's back and head slammed against the wall. Stars burst in front of his eyes, quickly banished by Shiva giving him a cura spell. The pain faded fast. The taste of his blood did not. Squall glared ahead at the smirking visage of the G-soldier. In his hulking green flying machine, he had probably barely cleared the staircase down from the second-floor balcony. Laughing at him, the man's fingers danced teasingly on the controls, silently threatening him under the roar of the propellers keeping the personal flying machine up. What to do? What to do? There was no way he was going to let Squall leave. And he could be smashed to a pulp by that machine before that girl down the hall could come to his aid. His fingers twitched for his blade, but the smirk on the soldier's face dared him to try. Squall's hand closed into a fist. Doing so, his fingers hit upon a strange shape. His eyes darted down quickly to see that he had been slammed against the emergency exit door. and his fingers were dancing right on the edge of the release switch. The flying machine in front of Squall bounced gently in the halls. The wind it threw off was throwing about his hair and his jacket. The soldier, held in place by only the straps of the flyer, was still smirking at him. And that perfectly good flying machine. Squall smirked back. The smile immediately faded from the soldier's mouth and turned into a hard, suspicious glare. He rammed forward on the stick, not wanting to give his enemy the chance to try anything. Squall's hand grabbed the lever of the emergency release. He twisted it and a loud puff of air was accompanied by the door falling backwards. The soldier slammed into him, forcing it open. Squall grabbed onto the straps keeping him in as the two of them tumbled down the bright yellow emergency slide down into the empty air. Squall's fingers froze the metal clasp tying the man in place. The soldier cried out from the freezing cold as Squall grabbed onto it. With a single, violent twist, the metal shattered under his grasp. The soldier fell, dragging Squall down with him. The quickly spinning reel of the repelling line dropped them downward in the rushing wind. Squall and the soldier jerked against the end of the cord, both dangling from the end. Squall's boot was pushing the soldiers from the ring at the bottom. His hand was forcing Squall's up and into an awkward position. Uncontrolled, the flyer just moved around the garden on no real course. Squall and the soldier both were left helpless to its whims as they grappled at the bottom of the repelling line.
"Worthless seed,"
the soldier was saying, throwing wild punches that Squall was absorbing with his free arm. He felt the force of each punch, but none landed on his face.
"How dare you oppose the sorceress? You will submit to Galbadian rule."
He drew back and punched forward. Squall grabbed his fist in his hand. The soldier jerked back, struggling against his hold.
"I need your flying machine,"
Squall told him, grinning. He jerked the man forward. At the same time, his knee came up. It slammed into the man's gut, causing him to grunt and his hand to slip. It fell lower, allowing Squall to lower his own and get a better grip on the repelling cord. The revolving rings of the garden were a bright backdrop as the flyer started descending. Squall frowned at the sight of it. He drew back his fist. The soldier's glass jaw broke under his punch. Squall felt the bone give. The pain of it made the soldier's eyes roll back in his head. His hand relaxed involuntarily. His foot slipped out from the rung of the flyer. His body dropped down onto the garden's ring. The sudden lack of weight sent the flyer rushing higher into the sky. Squall turned away before he could see the body land. He focused instead on taking hold of the repelling cord and climbing back up. It wasn't all that difficult of a task as the line wasn't all that long. With the restraints broken, he couldn't take control of it the way it was designed. However, what he could do was climb onto the side of the machine. The right side, where the controls were located on the arm. He took hold of the flight stick and frowned as he gave it an experimental push forward. The flyer responded easily. It rushed forward. Squall turned it slightly and it began following the curve around the garden. It took him a moment to realize he could adjust the height of the flyer by using a secondary, smaller analog at the center of the first one. However, once he grasped that, he grinned to himself and began piloting it around like a pro. Hanging off of the craggy face of what had once been the quad balcony, Renoa's teeth were clenched with the effort it was taking to hold on. No matter that Diablos was taking part of her weight. She had been hanging from the side of the garden for far too long now. She could feel a peculiar, hollow pain in her shoulders as it felt like they were slowly being stretched out of socket. The skin of her hands was raw and numb, making it that much more difficult to hang on. The blood she had shed grabbing the rock had dried, and Diablos was preventing any new wounds from opening with a slow but steady supply of her old cure spells. But the pain-relieving effects did little against new stimulus, and it was constantly hurting. Not for the first time, Rinoa tried putting her feet against the rock, to try to take at least some of the pressure from her fingers. There was nothing for her feet to grab. The uneven surface was rough, but the ledges were too small to get a grip on. Zell had been gone too long. Worse than that, Rinoa was able to watch Galbadian goons land on the balcony, slowly taking it over. While none of them had noticed her yet, she could hear them yelling up above about holding rank and keeping back the seeds. Which meant she was well and truly trapped here. What was she even holding on for if there was no way that anyone was going to be able to get to her? For all she knew, this battle could wage on for hours more. How long, until the strength in her hands finally just snapped and she was unable to stop herself from letting go? Was this how she died? Diablos protested in her head, trying harder to take some of her weight. But he was already taxing his powers. There was little else he could do. There was nothing else she could do. Squall. She was sure he was off right now, thinking up some grand plan for leading the garden to victory. She would never get to see it. She would never even get their third date. And if she fell right now? Rinoa felt the pressure of his and her mother's rings pressing into her chest, squished between her body and the rock. His favorite ring, entrusted to her for safekeeping. The loud humming of the flyer didn't immediately catch her attention. She had heard many of them flying overhead. She had been praying that none would spot her. As yet, none had. Though, if one did, would she really be any worse off? So she paid it no mind initially. She was biting her bottom lip, putting all of her focus into keeping her hands clenched despite the throbbing numbness. The machine got louder. Unable to ignore it any longer, Rinoa's eyes opened. She turned around, her hair getting into her face, as she followed the sound. She was expecting a smirking G-soldier. She was even sort of hoping for it. At least that would mean this fight would finally be over. She didn't dare hope, she couldn't believe she was even seeing. Squall's chestnut locks were whipping about wildly. His jacket had fallen open and his white shirt was pressed tight against his firm chest. He was steering the flying machine one-handed, hanging off of the side. He was staring right at her, lowering in close to where she was hanging. And his eyes were so on. Rinoa blinked. Not wanting to believe. Not daring to hope. He had actually flown here to save her. How in the name of Hein? Squall got closer, hovering right above her head. The grappling cord dangled right near her. Rinoa spotted the dangling, weighted ring with such relief that it nearly brought tears to her eyes. A cry of delight, a smile of disbelief, she reached out. Her numb fingers nearly missed the rope. Her eager and ready foot did not miss the ring. Her weight, freed from her hands and shoulders, sent painful cries of relief up her spine and into her brain. She barely felt it. Rinoa was laughing with exhilaration as Squall steered the flyer away from the cliff and down towards Galbadia Garden. She could just barely see the edge of it, having been forced into the ground by Nita's superior offensive driving. Rinoa hugged the grappling line, giving her abused fingers a chance to heal. Her head fell back and she looked up to see Squall gazing down at her. His eyes, so intense, were quiet, but so focused. She loved being the focus of those eyes. It sent chills down her spine that banished the pain in her limbs. She took firmer hold of the line and stared right back up at him until he was forced to look ahead so he could see where he was landing. Rinoa looked down as well. Into the writhing mass of steel, magic, and bodies that was the battlefield on the Galbadian courtyard. The acrid scent of burning flesh and cloth, the coppery scent of blood, and the bitter scent of sweat hit her nose like a hammer. Rinoa's jaw tightened as she reminded herself that there was still a battle to be fought. Squall lowered the flyer slowly. Rinoa's other foot swung out as the stone path of the garden came in closer. She waited until she was only a few short feet off the ground. She jumped at the same time Squall did. She hit the ground just a moment before him. Squall came down next to her, his hand grabbing her shoulder. He gave her a look. With those intense eyes of his. In the middle of a battle, that was the best he could manage. He turned away, looking back to the battle. Rinoa looked forward, towards the garden. Where the sorceress was. The head of the operations, so to speak. Take out the head. Take out the body.
Over there.
She yelled over the sounds of fighting.
There's the entrance.
Squall's gaze turned and followed her finger. The two of them jumped to their feet. She felt his hand against her back, pushing her ahead of him. She sprinting along the ground obediently. She could feel the cold of his body, hear the stomping of his boots, directly behind her. He didn't grab hold of her, but she felt like he had taken her hand and was pulling her along. In the open area, having surprised the G Army, the Seeds and students were faring far better. It was more of an even fight. No one worried about breaking their garden. The students were free to fight and the words of their leader rang in their ears as encouragement. An enormous fireball whizzed past Squall and Rinoa. The ground rocked as a grenade went off, spilling dirt and rocks into the sky and falling over them. She caught sight of a guy being clotheslined by a saber off of his motorcycle. When part of her was tempted to stop to help the garden students, Squall's presence urged her silently on. They had a much more urgent matter to attend to. Taking care of this part of the army would mean nothing if they didn't deal with the leader. The two of them escaped the outskirts of the battle, leaping over the body of a fallen soldier. They continued on into the grass, following the outer walls of the garden around. They didn't slow until they were in front of a metal walkway leading to a back entrance into the garden. Only then did they stop and turn back, breathing hard. From here, they couldn't see the battle. Though they could hear it. Echoing faintly in the distance, the sound of shells exploding and magic casting seemed so far off even just this short distance away. Rinoa turned back to Squall first. He was looking over her head, his chest heaving with effort. His hand was on her upper arm now, as though trying to hold her in place. She smiled gently and the movement turned his eyes down to her again. His expression softened slightly, but his eyes remained on. She felt her skin tingling under that gaze. It felt even better knowing that she was alive to feel it again. Squall, she breathed softly.
Thank you.
Squall started at the sincerity in her voice. His hand released her quickly and he turned his eyes away. That did nothing to ease the soft blush on his cheeks and her smile widened. She just loved it when her big, bad mercenary got flustered like that.
It was,
Squall cleared his throat, trying to adopt a professional tone.
Don't worry about it. It was my job. We're still under contract, despite my promotion. So it falls to me to keep you safe. And it was everyone else's idea anyway. And I just happened to find you. That's all. So, like I said, don't worry about it.
Rinoa was laughing. Not at him, he knew that now. He recognized her happy laugh. She lifted her head again and he tried to ignore the way her eyes shined at him. Despite the battle raging behind them, she had never felt so alive.
Of course,
she nodded, agreeing with his excuses easily. They both knew they weren't true. She was just allowing him to keep up the charade. And he was grateful for it. Squall let out a breath and looked towards the door of the garden.
You know something,
she said softly, drawing his attention back towards her.
I couldn't afford to fall off that cliff and die. I have something very important that belongs to you.
Squall watched as she reached up and the tips of her fingers gently brushed the ring she always wore around her neck. No. Not just one ring. There was a second one there now. Squall frowned slightly, trying to get a better look at the silver band.
I can't die until I give it back to you, right?
She smiled up at him and her finger twisted the ring slightly. The heavier face side of the ring turned up and offered Squall a glimpse of the carving.
See? Zell gave it to me. I've been holding on to it.
Squall was gonna kill him.
That's my favorite ring,
he told her firmly, pointing to it.
You had better give it back.
Don't you dare fall off of the garden.
I'm sure it is,
Rinoa said, smiling at the gruffness of his voice. She knew that meant he was feeling something he was unaccustomed to.
It's a cool-looking ring. What's this monster on it anyway?
Squall let out a small breath.
It's not a monster. It's an animal. An animal.
She blinked, surprised.
Yeah. From the old days. It's a lion. One of the last animal species to go extinct when the monsters arrived. They're known for their great strength and pride.
Rinoa put her hands behind her back, deliberately pushing her chest out in the process. She was rewarded by the lump in Squall's throat jerking as he swallowed at the sight.
Great strength.
Her eyes moved up his chest, a strong defined chest that she had enjoyed the sight of many times already and still couldn't wait to see it again.
Pride.
She looked into his intense eyes. Unyielding, unwavering.
Kind of like you, Squall.
Squall turned away, shaking his head slightly. He didn't see what she could see.
I wish.
She grinned, reaching up to touch the ring again. She took it between her fingers and got to watch out of her periphery as Squall stared at the way her fingers twisted the silver.
You do seem to like the symbol a lot, surrounding yourself with your own kind. It's just decoration.
It felt like a piece of armor.
It's obviously important to you. It's the only thing I've seen you ask for. If it wasn't important, why would you keep it so close?
Squall didn't have an answer for that. She smiled.
So this lion of yours, does it have a name?
He grinned.
Of course. He's called Griever. Griever.
She said the word slowly, like she was savoring the taste of it. Squall's eyes were trapped on her lips as she formed the word. It was a huge concession for him to admit something like this to her. Owning to the name he had given the lion was a secret he had given no one else. He wondered if she knew how much it meant to him to share that with her. She did.
You know,
she smiled up at him, still playing with the band.
Zell said he'll make me one exactly like it. Who knows? Maybe I can become like a lion, too.
Unable to help herself, she giggled, her face breaking out into a wide grin. Her cheeks flushed pink at the thought of her wearing Squall's ring. His mark. Having it in pride of place on her hand. Just the mental image was enough to make her giddy.
That'd be crazy, hey? I mean, everyone might, you know, get the wrong idea about us.
Matching rings. Everyone knew what that meant. Squall raised an eyebrow at her conflicting reactions. If it was so crazy, why did she sound so very delighted? Police. Everyone was trying to get them together. It was so obvious, even he could tell. He kind of wished they would all mind their own business. He would make that step when he was very well ready.
You sound like you want everyone to get the wrong idea,
he finally said evenly.
No 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 no.
She hastened to say, even as the smile on her face contradicted her words. Well. His ring was already around her neck. And he felt no great desire to take it back. He actually kind of liked the way it looked, right there on the swell of her breasts. He cleared his throat, turning away quickly. Rinoa didn't miss the direction his mind had taken and she grinned slyly.
Well. Everyone's waiting.
This was hardly the place to be fantasizing about resting his head on those soft globes, his ring right in sight, as her fingers wound through his hair. Damn it.
Rinoa.
He turned to her and had to force down the desire to tell her to stay here. To stay safe. This was not the place for her to be safe, next door to a battlefield. And, just as before, he couldn't deny her the right to fight. No matter how much he wished, he could just fight all her battles for her.
Let's go,
he jerked his head to the side. Her face broke out into a wide grin. She was almost laughing as she ran towards the side door. Squall followed after her more slowly.
Hurry up, Squall.
She laughed, hitting the latch on the door. So alive and free. Squall was almost smiling as he followed after her. To where the sorceress waited within. End of chapter.